Thank you all for coming out. My name is Jesse Iliff. I'm Executive Director of the Severn River Association. It's a real pleasure to see that we have built this room. I'm not at all surprised, honestly, given the caliber of the speaker that you're going to hear from tonight. But I wanted to give you all a few updates about what's been going on with Severn River Association. It's been a super busy time. April always is in the environmental field. I have a bunch of special events going on. Tomorrow we're doing a stream cleanup. And on Earth Day itself, we have other events, and then our annual meeting is next week. So if you aren't already a member, I hope that you will join us at SRA and come to our annual meetings. Registration is available on the website. And we are bringing on a new staff member tomorrow, a new restoration manager to help us implement our Severn River Action Plan. So it's an exciting time at SRA. And I'm really glad to see you all here and see you online. And I want to hand over the mic now to our board member, Jeff Shomig, to introduce our speaker because he knows him a lot better than me. So.
Thank you. Shawn said that his voice is a little hoarse, so I'm going to be presenting tonight instead of Shawn. So, kidding, we both went tramp with each other heading to this. I'm Jeff Shomig. I'm a board member, as Jesse said. It's good to see so many people here. Our fishing related speaker series always bring a good crowd, and particularly when the speaker is Shawn Kimbro. I met Shawn probably around 2005-ish when he migrated here from the hills of Tennessee to the shores of the Chesapeake and brought his strange bass fishing skills with him and learned, or not learned, but sort of taught us who had been here for a while the art of light tackle trolling. That was sort of his first contribution, I think, to the fishing culture of the Chesapeake, where he would have some sort of a dual rig contraption. I say contraption, I understand from Shawn, this is standard fare out in the compounds of reservoirs of Tennessee, but it would be a diving plug, and then on one line, which would take the bait down maybe 20 feet or so, and then on the other line would be a smaller bucktail. And I understand it worked pretty well, actually. I actually tried it, and it did not work well for me. It tanked us, but it worked well for Shawn. It's been absolutely fascinating to me to see how Shawn has really taught so many people in this region, many of whom have fished for decades before Shawn came here, creative ways, new ways, fun ways, and in many cases more effective ways to fish for striped bass in particular. And then more recently, going to the creeks and freshwater bodies of water around the watershed and learning all sorts of stuff that none of us knew about these small overlooked creeks. I think you've probably, discovered more species of sunfish that live in these creeks than anybody knew was there. In addition to that, Shawn's a Renaissance man, as many of you know. He's been heavily involved, I think, for most of his life in the bluegrass music industry, and his kids now are quite successful at it. And I wrote down when we're talking on the phone earlier, Shawn, I wrote down Eric Clapton. And I think that one of your sons recorded a song with Eric Clapton. Is that right?
He recorded 3 songs just last week.
Oh, wow. That's recent news. All right. So you're hearing it here first. In addition to that, Shawn runs this sleep clinic at GW University, actually right near my office. So we run into each other in DC all the time. And last but certainly not least, Shawn is a board member for Alliance of the Chesapeake, and we have a number of Alliance folks here today. A great organization with whom SRA has a terrific relationship, and they do good work for the Bay as well. So I'll stop talking now. Let me turn it over to the reason we're all here tonight. Shawn, come on up.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know Jeff as Goose, not as Jeff. When I see him on K Street and he's all dressed up in his 3-piece suit and doing his lawyer stuff, I still call him Goose. Mostly out of spite. And always when he has a partner or somebody there with him. But Jeff and I have fished together quite a bit and have always had a great time. He's an excellent fisherman. Don't let him kid you when he said something didn't work for him and see he wasn't doing anything wrong. I explained it wrong, I'm sure. But yeah, well, thank you for coming out, and thanks to those of you who are watching online. They drew me a little box here. I've got a blue line down that I'm not supposed to step out of. I'm not really good at staying in the line. And that goes for just about anything, but I'm going to do my best tonight to do that. But yes, thank you, the Severn River Association. I know of you. I actually did a talk for SVA SRAs probably 10 years ago in Annapolis, and this is the first time back. And at that time, I think I was talking about catching rockfish, and this one is a little different. What I want to talk about today is just overall basic fishing. Now, you know, I advertised this talk a little bit on social media, and I said that it's kind of an introductory talk, and I get here and I see some of the best fishermen on the Chesapeake Bay here in the audience. So it's a little bit intimidating because I have written a few books about fishing on the bay, but if we put all the knowledge that's in this room right now into a book, it would, you know, stack up higher than the ceiling because there are so many good fishermen here. So if you all will bear with me, and if I say something wrong, you just point it out and let me know, and you can straighten me out. And there's no right or wrong way to fish. Everybody has their own techniques, and I'm going to talk about as we move through the talk here. A lot of us have our own secret weapons. But thanks again for coming out. Kate Fritz is here, the CEO for the Alliance of the Chesapeake Bay. I'm a big fan of Kate Fritz, in case you didn't know, for a lot of different reasons, but also because we're fishing partners and have been fishing together for what, 4 years now? Okay. And she's a really good fly angler and whatever else she wants to do. Joe Gill is here. Joe Gill, a past DNR secretary. In fact, not long after I moved here, Joe was in the office there, and I got to know a lot of people through DNR. They were working for Joe at the time, and still keep up with those. In fact, some of my best friends worked for Joe when he was secretary. So thanks for coming out, Joe. Appreciate that. But let's go ahead and get started. If you want to go ahead and advance, I said, Jesse, thank you for we forgot our remotes, and so we're going to kind of wing it as we go here. Somebody said, and Charles Waterman said, most of the world is covered by water. The angler's job is simple: pick out the best parts. And certainly the Severn River is one of the best parts. How many here live actually on the river, have a dock, you're right there on the river? Quite a few, and I suspected that was the case. And the rest of us, you know, when I first moved here, I lived on the Magothy River. I lived on the Broadneck Peninsula, not too far from here in Arnold, down Shore Acres. And Cape Mezzanotte was my wife and I's favorite place. In fact, we were just here last weekend, kind of out of nostalgia. We were on the way to go see Bruce Springsteen in Baltimore. My wife Diane is a big Bruce fan, and so am I. My boat is named Thunder Road, partly after Bruce Springsteen's song, partly after Robert Mitchum's great song. Does anybody know Robert Mitchum's song? Thunder Road, thunder, thunder, down the road. I'm not going to sing it, but it's a song about moonshine in the hills of Appalachia. A guy wrecks his car in Knoxville, Tennessee, and Robert Mitchum, who was an Eastern Shore resident, wrote that song. Jim and Jesse did a bluegrass version of it. It was fantastic, and that's how I learned it. And also because I've been known to go out in a few thunderstorms and fish, and kind of go in any kind of conditions. When I first moved here, I really didn't know anything about the Chesapeake Bay. Now I grew up as a dock rat in East Tennessee on the TVA lakes down there. My dad owned a boat dock, and that was my first job. In fact, I've never been a morning person, so I slept in a cot behind the cash register. And so when people would hit the dock in the morning with those muddy boots at 5 a.m., some awful hour, then I'd wake up and dip out minnows or sell them some night crawlers or do whatever I had to do. And most of my fishing I did at night because I had to work during the day at the dock. and fished all my life. Never have not been around the body of water. I was in the Army for a while, lived in Hawaii, lived in some other places where there was a lot of water around, and moved up here about 17 years ago. I had no idea how to fish the Chesapeake Bay. It scared me to death. And so I really wanted to learn everything I could possibly learn. The first thing I did was I got on a charter boat down in Chesapeake Beach, and we went around and we trolled around with these great big rods that are bigger around than that microphone stand there, that camera stand. And we caught some fish. And so I thought, well, that's what you have to do. So I bought me an old 1994 Sea Ray Express Cruiser, and I got me some, I went to Home Depot and I got me some PVC pipes. I made me a trolling rig, and I hung some rods off the back of that boat, and I trolled, and I caught a few fish, like tackle trolling. One day I was trolling around out near Baltimore Light, and all of a sudden the birds came around and the fish came up and started breaking, and there was this melee going on all around the boat. And I happened to have one of my bass fishing rigs under the cabin of that old Sea Ray. Reached under there and grabbed a top water plug and threw it out. And, huge strike, huge blow up, nice fish. I was hooked. I never trolled again, and figured out that that's the way to do it. Now, one of the reasons I don't like trolling is because I'm extremely ADD, and as you can tell, I'm really struggling staying in this box right here. I'm usually walking around somewhere, and if you put me on a trolling boat, the first thing I'm going to do is drink every beer on the boat, and then I'll eat every sandwich, and then I'll probably be doing laps around the cockpit. So trolling has never been the thing for me. I'm more of an active fisherman. Light tackle fishing, I define as just casting and retrieving lures, just like we all learned how to fish. That's what we learned. Maybe it was a Zebco 202 or a 404 or a 33 if you were really fancy, and you got out there and you cast a red worm under a bobber and you caught your first fish. Maybe it was a bluegill, maybe it was white perch. You're casting and retrieving. That's exactly what light tackle fishing is, and that's why I love it so much. Let's move to the next slide. Severn River. You all know this. I don't have to tell you anything. 14 miles from the mouth of the Severn River from the mouth of Severn Run to Greenberry Point. Did you know that George Washington almost died at Greenberry Point? I didn't know that. I just found that out recently. But he was sailing up the bay in a storm and ran aground on Greenberry Point. They finally got the ship off the rocks, and then the captain ran aground over on the other side going into Annapolis. I don't think the captain kept his job driving the president around too long after that. But anyway, a good river, good place to fish. I fished it. In fact, I think I met Jeff through a club called the Severn River Rod and Keg Club. They advertise themselves as a drinking club with a fishing problem. A bunch of great guys, and I haven't been to many meetings recently, but I really enjoyed learning Severn River through a lot of those guys that were in that club, and still sneak over there every once in a while. 81 square miles of watershed, and that's what's interesting about that is that is the drainage for the river, but about 20% of that 81 square miles is impervious surfaces in parking lots. It's like we're parking in right here. We talk about a struggle. There's a struggle there. And as you all know well, and Jesse, thank you for all the work that you all do to try to keep this river clean, as clean as you can keep it. I appreciate it. I wanted to talk a little bit about anglers and environmentalists. Because on my Facebook page, I introduced myself as I hug trees and 50-inch rockfish, and I happily do both. Yeah, I'm a tree hugger. I'm an environmentalist, and I'm proud to be that. And I think when it gets down to it, any fisherman you talk to is actually an environmentalist. They can't help it. And my theory is, and you can argue with this, but my theory is that the more people that get into outdoor sports like fishing or hiking or trail biking or whatever we do, sailing even, that the more we want to preserve those things that we love so much. And so part of the reason that I've written the books that I've written and that I love teaching people how to fish is because I feel like everybody who becomes a light tackle fisherman also becomes an environmentalist and a conservationist. You can't help it. If you love it, You want your kids to love it. You want your family members to love it. You want your neighbors to love it. You want the guy across the street to love it, just so you can drink a beer with him and talk about that big fish you caught. There's something about it that just makes you want to do it. And so, you know, I get the part about how sometimes people will say, you know, well, you're just going out torturing fish. And yeah, you know what? I can't argue with that. I feel sorry for every fish I catch, and I don't know a good angler who doesn't. We just do that. It's part of it. But the reason that we do things like we're doing tonight, the reason that we get out there and we do stream cleanups, the reason that we do all this work that we do, or give our money and time to protect this resource, is because we love it so much. That's what drives us. And that's what drives me, and I bet it's what drives you as well. Anglers pay more than $1 billion annually toward conservation, and here in Maryland, I can't read my own writing here, Maryland license sales and other fishing-related revenues, 30 million to the state, and that's probably an old number, Joe. I bet it's even more than that now. Lots of money coming in, and a lot of that money, of course, goes to pay staff and stuff, but a lot of it goes right back to the resource, and that fishing license revenue especially is designated to go right back to the resource. So that's a good thing. And I talked about that already, so let's go ahead. Aldo Leopold, probably the most influential environmentalist of the 20th century, said, "A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, the stability, and the beauty of the body community. It's wrong when it tends otherwise." And that's what fishing is. You know what? That's what we do. Is we try to take care of the resource that we enjoy so much. So I kind of like that quote, and that's, you know, that's my argument when people talk about, hey, you're going out and torturing fish. Let's talk about fish from the Severn River now. What are you going to catch? Well, here's what you'll probably catch. There's Kate with a real nice white perch. There's Jeff with a couple of pretty rockfish. There's some other friend, that's my grandson Tucker over there, another friend with some pretty bluefish. Yellow perch, there's still enough yellow perch to catch yellow perch in the Severn. That is a green sunfish, and I bet you caught one in your crab pot if you live on a dock and we've got a crab pot out there. Either a green sunfish or it might be a pumpkin seed sunfish, because both those species kind of hang around together with each other. And they love to try to get in the crab pot and steal bait, and sometimes they get caught in there. And then down in the corner is chain pickerel. I just finished a 3-month long, actually 4 months long this year, pickerel tournament, and was lucky enough to win it on the fly this year that Coastal Conservation Association sponsors. We had the pickerel is a wonderful species. And the Severn River, it's kind of cyclic, and that some years it's better than others. This past year, it was superb. It was really good. Lots of 25-inch, 20-inch fish. And I think the biggest one was 27 inches coming out of the Severn River. That's getting close to the state record pickerel. That's big pickerel.
What was yours?
What's that?
What was yours?
My biggest was 27 and a half. That was, hey, you can cut me some slack. That was on a fly rod. I was handicapped. What you might catch? You might catch puppy drum. Does anybody caught puppy drum in the Severn? Yeah. And so I have a feeling it's going to be a good year for puppy drum this year. They won't be here until June or July. But once they start showing up, start fishing for them shallow, you'll start seeing some. Because we had a mild winter, so lots of puppy drum, speckled trout. That's a speckled trout, not even a good picture of it, but speckled trout. You caught speckled trout in the Severn. Yep. How about spot? Norfolk spot. Little panfish, they're great rockfish bait. Croakers, not so many croakers anymore, but there's still some croakers around. And then finally, summer flounder. So a lot of little summer flounder in the Severn, not a whole lot of big ones like there used to be, but I bet you caught summer flounder before. Let's go ahead to the next. Or the invasives. So that's you guys know Charles Lawrence, right? Charles is an artist in Annapolis. If you see a mural on one of the buildings and it has a fish on it in downtown Annapolis, Charles did. He's a great artist, and If you, you see a lot of his work in some of the restaurants around too. And then that's a blue catfish over there on the side. And I'm not going to talk too much about invasive species, but it is something that we have to be aware of and be concerned about. Because these fish are eating up our native species. I love our native species. I don't fish for them intentionally too much. I used to fish for blue catfish. In fact, I put myself through college fishing for blue catfish using trot lines on the Tennessee River system. And would catch hundreds of pounds a day. And I really don't ever want to see another blue catfish if I can avoid it. But those species are out there. What you won't catch, at least not anymore. That's a long-nosed gar. Has anybody ever seen a long-nosed gar in the Severn? Have you seen? Not Severn, but farther south. Yeah, same here. That fish came from Pocono. But sturgeon. At one time, there were long-nosed gar and sturgeon in the Severn, and actually not that long ago. Gray trout or sea trout. That we call them, not so much anymore. You don't see them too much. Maybe some little bitty ones will show up out near the mouth of the river sometimes, but not too much. Brook trout, did you know there are brook trout in the Severn? Not actually in the Severn proper, but if you go north from here to, what is it, Jabez? Yeah, that was once known as it's the farther south and the warmest water that supported a native brook trout population on the East Coast, but on at least the tidal section of the East Coast, but not anymore there. And finally, gudgeons. Anybody ever heard of a fish called a gudgeon? You know gudgeons? There's somebody who does. I bet you know more about them than I do. I got one of red bridges. Advance to the next one. Let's talk about gudgeons for a minute. A lost Severn River delicacy. There was a time when they closed schools, they put up placards in the post offices, and they advertised the gudgeon run. And the gudgeon is a little fish. I have a picture of it before you can kind of tell right there. That's after they're clean. They're minnows. They're a little bit, they're spot-tailed shiners, is what they are. And so you catch them with a little piece of bread or a little worm or something on a really tiny hook. And you catch them by the hundreds. The first time I went fishing with my buddy Ted Corker, and he took me up, that's on the little gunpowder. And that was only a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, maybe. And he said, "You're gonna love this." And I said, "Well, I don't know about that." And so we started catching a few, and I said, "Okay, maybe I will keep them." And I didn't have anything to keep them in, but I had a big gulp cup up in my truck. So I went and got my big gulp cup, filled it up with gudgeons. And he didn't have anything to keep his in, so he took his socks off. With minnows. I don't know if I ate those fish or not, but that's what he did. Anyway, we took them home. You got them, cut their heads off, bread them, fry them. They are absolutely delicious. It's a Maryland delicacy. Maybe they'll come back. They're coming back in some of the upper bay streams. They're coming back over on the eastern shore. The gentleman just mentioned Red Bridges. And the gudgeon run starts really early on Red Bridges. It's going on right now on the western shore side. And Severn Run was known as a very popular gudgeon fishing location. In fact, I think that's where that picture is taken right there up on the top. And you see people just line the streams for them because it's so much fun. Those days are gone, maybe, but maybe they'll come back. If we keep doing what we're doing, I feel like we're getting a little bit of a head of steam here, making some progress. Maybe we can do this again. Let's talk about yellow perch for a minute. I did talk for the Magothy River Association earlier this year about yellow perch. And so if some of these slides look familiar, that's why. This is Severn Run. That's Veterans Highway, where it crosses Severn Run. And this is right down below that bridge that you see right down there in that picture. There was a time when there was a fish hatchery up into the 1960s, I think maybe started in the 1920s, maybe even earlier than that. There was a yellow perch hatchery there. They raised yellow perch fry and shipped them all over the state. Well, as you know, the yellow perch run, we don't have it anymore, although there are a few. I got up there this year. We did, the Alliance held a Wild and Scenic Film Festival, and Mason and Kate were there I went out and drove down to Severn Run and caught a couple of little yellow perch before that film festival. So there are still some there. There are yellow perch who are still spawning. If they're successful or not, I don't know. I think they are successfully spawning in the Magathie and maybe in the Severn. But go ahead and advance to the next slide. The good thing I like about yellow perch is they're kind of canaries in the coal mine. And they, I mean, that phrase is overused when we talk about environmental species a lot. But yellow perch is a perfect example of that because they need relatively clean water and they like to move around. They school up in the spring, but then they move out and spread out along the shorelines in the summertime. And so if they don't have clean water, well, then they can't exist. And they also like in the winter to stage in deep water. Well, the deepest water in the upper part of the bay is at Round Bay, and the upper part of the Severn is at Round Bay. And if you've done any reading, and I'm sure Jesse's told you about this too, that becomes a dead zone. There's no oxygen there anymore, so they can't live there. So yellow perch really are canaries in the coal mine. They are not a threatened species. Let's make that point right now. Yellow perch are prolific all over the country. They're not prolific in the Severn, and we want to protect them in the Severn. But if you go anywhere else, don't feel bad about eating yellow perch. There's tons of them. Every time I go to Michigan, there's a restaurant that I stop at right beside the Cabela's place on 23, one up toward Ann Arbor, that sells the best yellow perch fillets you've ever had. And we stop and get them. And I can't wait till the wintertime when I start catching to eat them. There is a commercial fishery for yellow perch, and this is how they do it. They do it with gill nets. And so they don't fish commercially for yellow perch in the Severn, but they do in other parts of the Chesapeake Bay. I think the quota is almost 30,000 pounds in Maryland, and they got it this year. Although I do think the yellow perch spawn was off a little bit, maybe as a result of the bases. We like to blame it on something besides ourselves. And so maybe it's blue catfish and snakeheads that are eating yellow perch. Blue catfish will actually eat yellow perch eggs, and they're the only species that we know of a fish that will eat yellow perch eggs. The rest of them don't like them. But yellow perch, I mean, blue catfish will eat them. But there's a viable commercial harvest for yellow perch in Maryland. So some characteristics: they prefer less than 10 parts per thousand of salinity. So they don't like too salt. You won't find too salty. You won't find them out close to Greenberry Point, but you will find them on further up the river. They can live up to 13 years old. The biggest one I've ever caught was 15 inches. It's probably a 2.5 pound fish. Typically 7 to 10 inches. They have to be 9 inches to keep them in Maryland. They typically stay in the same tributary system through the year. They don't usually migrate out and go like the yellow perch and the Magathie don't usually come around and go to the Severn or vice versa. They're still a wonderful fish to target, and you can still catch some along the banks and off the docks in the Severn. The world record is 4 pounds 3 ounces. That's a huge yellow perch. I mentioned they spawn in the spring, and they usually begin schooling together in September and October. There's a couple of places over on the eastern shore that I start getting them toward the end of September. And these are a term I'm going to use a lot as we move through the talk a little farther. And they live hard bottoms. That just means oysters or mussels or some kind of shell bottom, and they prefer that because they like to eat little crabs in the fall. They're feeding up for the winter. Is what they're doing. And yellow perch are they're very tolerant of temperature changes and of salinity changes. So the temperature can drop 10 degrees. It doesn't affect the yellow perch at all. You find them deep in the wintertime, but it's not because they can't stand the water shallow. It's because that's where the bait is. The bait has to go deep to get to the warmer water in the winter. And so that's where the yellow perch goes to eat them. Spawning takes place in slow-moving streams like Severn Run, and the fish drape their egg sacs. Sometimes you hear them called bridal veils because that's what they look like, and they drape them over limbs that are under the water, and then the male perch come and fertilize those eggs, and the fish, swim off. The little fish swim off, and and hopefully live to grow big. But they don't always. And so they each, one yellow perch can have tens of thousands of little baby yellow perch. At the time, and maybe only, half of those, not even half, maybe a third of those survive, or not even that many. But that's, that's the way they stay, that's the way they stay in existence. Let's talk a little bit about white perch now. So I guess if I had to name my second favorite species in the Chesapeake Bay, my first one is shellcrackers, which is a type of sunfish that you can catch around here. But my second favorite will be white perch. It's just a great little species. You can catch them year round, and they are prolific. It is the most prolific fish species, other than probably menhaden or other bait species. It's the most prolific game fish anyway in the Severn River. Is white perch. They're not hard to catch, as you all know. Everybody in here has probably caught one, and so they're pretty easy to catch. They are semi-anadromous. So what that means is they can exist in salt water, and they'll move out. Not like yellow perch, they will move out of their river system. In fact, some of the yellow perch in the Severn probably move out to the Bay Bridge in the wintertime. They winter over deep at the Bay Bridge around the rock piles, especially. It's a good place to catch them in the wintertime. But they move up shallow in the fresher water to spawn. So they're in the white perch run. We're right in the middle of it right now. It's going on right now. A lot of people will say, "Oh no, it's over," but it's not over. It will last until the end of May. And I've even caught pre-spawn white perch the first week in June before, along with hickory shad in the first week of June. So it's still going on, and it will be going on quite a bit. The place to catch them on the Severn is Severn Run, or any of the other, whether they're 40 tributaries to the Severn. They will move up shallow. You can get out there and get them. I'll tell you how in just a minute. In the summertime, they prefer structure, and there's that term, live hard bottoms again. So if you go out the mouth of the Severn, past Greenberry Point to Hackett's Bar. Hackett's Bar is a historic oyster bar that's been there for, generations, probably hundreds of thousands of years. And it's just a great place to catch white perch and spot in the summertime. They move out there because those oysters, they collect not just oysters, but there's mussels that attach to them. And if you dig around and underneath the oysters, you'll find worms and baby crabs and all kinds of things that fish eat. Little fish come in, bigger fish come in to eat the big fish. The small fish and the big fish keep getting bigger, and it just creates this wonderful community that helps to propagate all the species. And so it's a very important ecosystem, sub-ecosystem for the Chesapeake. And once again, white perch are not threatening. There's no, you shouldn't feel bad about taking home a mess. Now, if I'm taking home a gunny sack full, or a bushel basket full or something, that you might be overdoing it a little bit, especially pre-spawn. But you shouldn't feel bad about keeping this white or yellow perch, because frankly, eating fish is one of the things that drives our sport. I love to eat fish. I don't eat too many rockfish anymore. Rockfish are kind of threatening. I'm just not a big fan of rockfish, although I understand that a lot of people are. But you can't get me away from a plate of yellow perch or white perch, because they're absolutely delicious. Let's talk about how to catch them. So fishing techniques. So there's a lot of, so I make the point in one of my books, I think it's Chesapeake Light Tackle, the first book, that people look at either, fishermen in the Chesapeake Bay kind of divide into two camps. One is that the Chesapeake Bay is a small ocean, and the other one is that the Chesapeake Bay is a giant lake. And they fish it that way. So you think about it, you got the guys who are the trollers who are bringing out their big, great big trolling rigs with broomsticks and stuff. They're fishing like a little ocean. You got the guys like me who are going out with these fairy ones, as they call them, and catching little fish, which they say it's not always little fish, but that's what they think. And so we're looking at kind of the big lake. So there's two different kind of ways to look at it there. And usually those saltwater guys, they're the ones who like those top and bottom rigs. And I'll show you one of those in a minute. Couple other techniques we'll talk about: drop shotting, tandem rigs, float and fly, and then fly fishing. Let's go ahead. First of all, let's talk about the gear. Spinning good outfits for. I talked about spinning rods. I'm a bait caster guy when it comes to rod fishing. I use bait casters more than I do spinning outfits. But if you're just getting into fishing, the best way to go is with a spinning outfit. Now that's usually what we start out with. Maybe we started out with a underspin or a closed face reel like those Zebcos. But as we, advance a little bit, we move up to a Mitchell 33. I see some people are about my age and they don't know what a Mitchell 33 is. Or a spinning outfit, which is what these kind of reels are right here. And so a 1000 to 3000 series is good. They get the smaller the number, the smaller the reel. 1000 is a small one. It's like an ultralight. They make even some 500s, but it's like an ultralight. And 2500 to 3000. That's what we would more likely use for rock fish. But it's still kind of small. If I was fishing for a giant red drum or something, I might go up to a 4,000 or 5,000 reel. But I like that 2500 Stratic. It's a good all-around outfit. It's a little pricey, a couple $100. You can go to anglers and find something similar for less than $100 easily. Reels are kind of, you kind of get what you pay for. You can buy a cheap reel that'll last you a summer. Or you can buy a reel that'll last you the rest of your life. And it just kind of depends on how much you pay for it. Kind of what you pay is what you get is kind of the way it works. There are bargains and some that aren't, but usually I like to stick with the brand names. That works a little faster. For the rods, 6 to 7 foot, fast or extra fast. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. Braided fishing line casts better than monofilament fishing line. Now, I'm 63 years old, but I'm too young to remember the old silk braided fishing line. It wasn't around when I was a kid, but I collect old fishing stuff and I've got a lot of reels that's got that old silk braid on there. It doesn't look that much different than today's modern braid. Between that silk and today's modern braid came the monofilament revolution and then the fluorocarbon revolution. So braid doesn't stretch. Monofilament stretches a lot. The fluorocarbon still stretches, but not as much as monofilament, and braid just doesn't have any stretch to it at all. So when you're fishing with braid, you feel your strikes better. My dad used to preach into my head. My dad was a Church of Christ minister back in rural Appalachia, and I'm not a real religious person anymore, but I did grow up going to church 3 times a week and even more if we had tent revivals or something. But he would go fishing after church in his suit a lot of times after preaching. I got a lot of pictures of him holding up fish, wearing a suit and tie after he got through fishing. But he used to say, son, you got to think down the line. And what he meant by that is you got to kind of create this unbroken chain between that lure down there in the water, up to the leader, up to the braided line, up to your rod tip, down the rod to your hands as you're holding the rod. So once you get really good at thinking down that line, you know everything that's going on with that lure. I mean, not just everything that's going on. You can tell the difference between a mud bottom and a sand bottom. You can tell the difference when your lure hits a rock or a stump. You can tell the difference between oysters and clams. John Page Williams and I, who some of you all know, were sitting out in my shop drinking scotch one night. And we came to the conclusion that you can tell when a fish even gets close to your lure. I think it's true. And here's why. Because especially a bigger fish gets close to a lure, they have to suck in water to suck that lure into their mouth. Or maybe they turn on it right before they hit it, change their mind. When that happens, it moves water around. When you're tuned in, when you're thinking down the line, when you really know what's going on with that lure, you can tell when something changes. Any little change like that, like a fish getting close to your lure. And you can do that with a float fly too. I'll tell you how to do that in just a minute. Rod action types. I talked about fast, extra fast, medium, and slow. Fast just means that the rod doesn't bend as much. Extra fast means it hardly bends at all. The slower the rod, the more it bends. The faster the rod, the faster the frequency it bends, the more sensitive it is. It's just like that braid and monofilament thing. I do a talk sometimes to fishing groups called amplitudes and frequencies, and we're just dividing up fishing gear into is it fast or slow, or the high amplitude or low amplitude. So fast rod just means that it has a really tight wobble, really fast frequency. Braided line, since it doesn't stretch, has a really fast frequency. The faster the frequency of those wobbles, the more sensitive, and the easier it is to think down the line, and the easier it is to feel what's going on with that lure. So think fast when it comes to fishing. Now, there are some applications where you might want to use a slower rod. For example, top water fishing, where you need to really chug a lure, and you need that bend in the rod. And the more a rod bends, the better it'll cast as well. So you can cast farther with a slower rod. So sometimes you want to make kind of a compromise between the two, but most of the time, fast or extra fast is the way you want to go. This is lure. We're going to talk about lure. I mean, a slide that we're going to talk about lure in a minute. It just shows where colors disappear at different depths, and I kind of like it because look, red disappears pretty quickly. Now, red shows up really good shallow. So I've got my favorite top water lure for stripers is a red-headed Head super spook. You've probably seen it. It's white with a red head. And that red shows up really good shallow. But once you get down 15 feet or so, you can't see red at all. It just looks like brown. When I lived in Hawaii, I used to do a lot of scuba diving. And it was always interesting to look at the colors and see what, how they disappeared or what they look like as deeper you got. Orange, a little bit deeper. Orange is a good color for stripers. Look at yellow. It shows up really deep. And then blue and green. If you've ever done any jigging for pelagic species like butterfly jigging for amberjack or for tuna offshore, you know that most of those lures are blue or have a lot of blue in them. And the reason for that is because blue shows up really well deep. Top and bottom rig. There's that top and bottom rig we were talking about. So this is what I was telling you about. The ocean fishermen really like a top and bottom rig. Now it'll catch fish because it's pretty foolproof. The reason it works so well is you just throw that thing out there, that big heavy sinker sits on the bottom, and when the fish comes by and grabs that lure, it catches itself. You don't have to do anything. Oh, you'll see us set the hook like Bill Dance on that 5-pound bass, but you don't really have to. They're already caught by the time you see that rod tip go down on a top and bottom rig. It's the most common used rig in the Chesapeake. Originally designed for surf fishing off the beach. But we've kind of adapted it even for perch fishing. It works very well at high current. If you've got a stream that has a really high current, you need to fish close to the bottom. That's a good time to use that. It also works well with minnows or bloodworms or whatever kind of bait you want to use. You can buy them already put together at any of the tackle shops. They're going to have some already made up, but it's not really the best way to fish for small species, or even for rockfish. Let's go ahead. A drop shot rig, however, is one of my favorite lures for yellow perch, especially around the Route 50 bridge or the Naval Academy bridge. So it's deep there, and perch will stage down deep, not just yellow perch, but white perch in the wintertime. A drop shot rig is the way to get them. I've caught them up on the Susquehanna Flats up above Flappin in 75 feet of water, and I've heard of them being caught in over 100 feet of water using a drop shot rig. All you do is put a sinker down on the bottom and then 2 flies or 2 soft plastic lures or something up above that, staged maybe about a foot apart. Drop it down, feel that lure hit the bottom, feel the sinker hit the bottom, raise it up, lower it down. Raise it up, lower it down. It's boring, it's idiot fishing, it catches fish. It works. Let's move on. Tandem rigs and spinners. Now we're getting to something I like a lot better. So the tandem rigs and spinners work better in shallow water. You can't really get a tandem rig or those spinners down unless you use a really heavy weight, when it's really deep. But once those fish move shallow like they are right now and how they will be the rest of the summer, then this is a good way to do it. A tandem rig is just 2 little lures tied together. Maybe a 16-ounce jig head, maybe a 32nd ounce jig head. I like to do a 16th and a 32nd. If the current's strong, I might do a 16. Kate and I did a lot of fishing down the Pocomoke this winter. And that's how we caught it more than anything else, was using those tandem rigs for yellow perch, crappie, some white perch, and chain pickerel is also great for great technique for chain pickerel. Kind of a standard rule for fishing: dark colors on dark days, light colors on light days. That seems counterintuitive, but the reason that works is because you want dark colors on dark days because they create more contrast. Think about this: if you wake up in the middle of the night, you need to get up and go to the bathroom, go to the kitchen, get a drink of water. It's dark in your bedroom. You're not looking for what color the bedspread is or what color the curtains are. You're looking for the crack in the door that shows you where the light is. You're looking for the bedpost so you don't stub your toe. You're looking for reasons, not to go somewhere, or you're looking for anything that stands out. So that's why dark colors work better on dark days, because there's not a lot of contrast in the sky. So that darker color, as the fish is looking up at the color, that darker color is going to point out where the lure is. They're going to see it better. Now, on lighter days, you've got more light in the water, more light in the sky, and they can see those colors better. But dark lures on dark days and light lures on light days is a fishing concept that has served me well throughout 60 plus years of fishing. Rooster tails, panther martins, and meps, those are called inline spinners. Meps, Agila spinners were invented in France. They're brought over here in World War II. The first ones ever sold in this country were sold on the eastern shore of Maryland in Easton. And they're a great little lure. And also rooster tails, shyster. Anybody heard of a lure called shyster? I told you I collect old lures, and I've got some old spinners. I kind of like them. And then panther martins. Panther martins, the reason they're so good, they start spinning just as soon as they hit the water. They spin as they fall, and it's a great little perch lure. And then here's the inline spinners. These three right here. Now, when we move up to this top row here, those are safety pin type spinners, and those are really good. They're not so good this time of year because the fish are a little slower with water temperature cooler. But as we move through the summer and the water gets warmer, those safety pin spinners and these chin spinners, like are on the bottom there, will come into play a lot better. But there, some of the brand names are Roadrunners, Beetle Spins, perch pounders. Anglers sell some called perch pounders that are pretty good. What makes those so good is that the spinner, the blade is right in line with the lure. So it will ride up and over a stump because the hook is always pointing up. If you see how the hook is up there. So if you hit a stump or a tree or something, sometimes it'll just ride right over that. So it's a good lure to use in heavy cover and works really good. And these, I call them chin spinners. You hear them called different names, but that just means that the spinner is not on a safety pin type device. It's just attached to the lure. And that's another good perch outfit, especially in the summertime. You could tip all of these with bait, and I do that sometimes, maybe a minnow if I'm pickerel fishing or fishing for yellow perch. This time of year, grass shrimp work really good. I'm going to tell you about my secret weapon. Float and fly, that's it. So if you talk to 20 different light tackle fishermen who like to fish for panfish like I do, you're probably going to hear 20 different techniques of their secret weapons. What's their best way to catch fish? So my family has had this float and fly technique for many years, and I know it works. There's probably a dozen float and fly fishermen that I know of on the East Coast. Jim Gronaw is one Jim Gronaw used to write for the Baltimore Sun and now write for Fisherman in several different publications. One of the best fishermen that I know of for panfish on the East Coast. He may be the best. He's a float and fly expert. Float and fly has served me well, no matter where I go, what part of the country, or how I fish. It's how I won the pickerel tournament this year, because you can use it on a fly rod just as you could use it on spinning outfits. It's just a great way to fish. And what it is basically is just a little fly. That's a 1/32 ounce fly. You can use any kind of feather fly or bucktail or hair fly, anything. and put it under a float. Now, I like a smaller float for the same reason I like braided line and fast rods, because a smaller float has a faster frequency. I can jerk it a little faster. It moves the fly a little bit faster. When you think about it, float and fly fishing is just a remote way of vertical jigging. You're casting that lure out there and then pop. The fly does this, up and down, up and down. Now, some species, like white perch in the wintertime, crappie in the wintertime especially, they're very deliberate eaters. Here's something you can do sometimes if you're looking for something to do on a rainy, windy day, go to Bass Pro Shops and or go to around the middle mall. And if you walk down the mall, there's a Mexican restaurant down there. If you talk to the bartender nice, she'll give you a margarita in a go cup. And you can take that down to the bench in front of the aquarium at Bass Pro Shop and sit there all afternoon. And it's pretty interesting because they feed those fish every once in a while. And they'll throw a few pellets in there. You watch those crappie. So that pellet starts floating down there. These pellets are designed to float slowly, And so that pellet starts floating down, and that crappie will come up to it and stop right before it gets to that pellet. And it looks at it. Maybe it's smelling it. I don't know. And it looks it over really well before it eats it. Now, even in an aquarium like that, they do that where there's lots of competition with other fish. So I know they're doing that when I'm fishing out on the Severn River or somewhere. They're being really deliberate. And white perch are that way in the wintertime. That's why a round-headed fly works better than a shad dart. I'll get arguments from Maryland fishermen about that because shad darts are so popular in this part of the country. Shad darts are designed with a slanted head that's made to flit erratically through the water. So if that crappie is, or white perch is going to come up and look that lure over, I don't want it flitting erratically. I want it going just as predictable as it possibly can. You'll catch more fish with a round-headed lure than you will a shad dart. Now, if you want to make it just be irresistible, put a grass shrimp on there. I'm not going to play that video, but that's I have a YouTube channel. And everything I'm talking about, I've got a video for on the YouTube channel. So look me up on YouTube and give it a watch. But this time of year, you can go out and scrape the pilings around any bridge or any dock, and you're going to come up with some grass shrimp. Just use a little, cloth net, pull them up, and you'll see them swimming around in there. Put them on some sawdust or even in some water in the fridge. Keep them in the refrigerator so you can keep them alive. And take them out, put them on your hook. White perch cannot resist grass shrimp. They just absolutely love them. I'm not above bait fishing. I'll bait fish sometimes. I prefer not to, but hey, whatever it takes. That's what it takes to get the fish. I'm all about it. Number 5 boats are smaller. Now, I had a slide and I think I missed it, but you look at hooks, think of hooks on a number line. So with 0 being like a moderate size hook, everything above the 0 is an aught. So 1 aught, 2 aught, 3 aught, 4 aught, they keep getting bigger. Everything below the 0 gets smaller as the numbers go up. So number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, all the way up to number 25 or 30, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny hook. So that's how you judge the size of your hooks. So I like number 5 hooks are smaller. Some people will say number 3 or number 2 for crappie, and crappie have a little bigger mouth, so that works. But for yellow perch, white perch, number 5 or smaller usually works better. We're moving to fly fishing. So fly fishing, another one of my favorite ways to fish. Probably is my favorite way to fish right now. After a while, you kind of look for challenges, and frankly, fly fishing, especially for pickerel, is hard. It's just really hard, but that's what makes it challenging. And it's also fun. If you've ever fly fished, you kind of get it. You know how much fun it is. If you haven't, I encourage you to find a guide or something somewhere, somebody you can go out and teach you how to fly fish, because you're going to love it. I use the exact same techniques that I use perch fishing with a float and fly. And by the way, I'm forgetting to show you. So this is I grabbed this right out of my boat right before I drove over here. And this is the Shimano Stencilite rod with a 1500 series reel. There's a little Plastilite, a 1964 Plastilite float. I found them on eBay there was a while. They're 3/4 inch. You can still find 3/4 inch floats. You know it's 3/4 inch because it will look like it's going to fall into the mouth of a beer bottle, but it won't quite. And there's that little fly. You can see that. It's just a little 1/32 inch fly with dyed chicken feathers. Yeah, they're called Popeye flies. Anglers has them now. They just started carrying them. Probably because I talked about them, people were asking for them. But they have them now, and they also have little floats like that. So here's how I modify it for fly fishing. Exactly the same lure, just a little different color on this one's the same lure. I'm using this little Oros indicator, and I can use that same float, but it's a little heavier, a little too heavy to cast efficiently with a fly rod. These little Oros indicators came out about 3 years ago. And they're fantastic. This is the smallest one that they make, and it's just a little bit bigger than that 3/4. That will fall to a beer bottle. Don't ask me. But the devil to get them out when they do. Those come in a single colors, orange, white, and pink, but they come apart, and you put the line through the center of them and then screw them back. Change the colors so that you've got one side pink and the other side white, or the one side orange and the other side pink, or whatever. And the reason you want to change those colors is because that way you can tell if your fly is on the bottom or not. Then your float becomes a fish finder. It becomes just as good as your sonar. It can tell you how deep the water is. If you see one color, your fly is on the bottom. If you see two colors, it's floating. And the way you know is because that runs right through the center. And so if the fly is not on the bottom, it's going to be riding just like that. So you see both colors. And that's the same principle with those Plastilite floats, with those little other floats too. It's going to ride. You're going to see white. If you see another color besides white, your fly is either on the bottom or it's in a fish's mouth, one way or the other. Let's move on. I'm running short on time. I just wanted to mention cooking perch. I've got a great recipe on my website. So take a look if you get a chance. I like house archery seasoning. Anybody else here use house of archery? Do you know what that is? Oh, you're in for a treat. So you're going to like it. They sell it in all the grocery stores. It's in the same aisle as the, and they don't pay me to say this, but it's just good. It's in the same aisle as the flour and cornmeal and stuff like that. And all I do is just fillet them, and I showed Stephen how to fillet fish this year, and he's probably better than I am now because I know he's a perfectionist when it comes to stuff like that, especially cooking. He did filleted some trout recently, but the way I do it is sometimes I'll egg wash it, but you don't have to. It's going to be damp anyway because you wash the fillets. Just dip it in that house archery, put it in the deep fryer. Which oil will be about 375. Doesn't take but about 5 minutes, and it's delicious. Now rock fishing, just quickly. So all that stuff I told you about pan fishing will make you a better rock fisher. And the reason for that is because, you know, I talked about tuning in and thinking down the line. If you can think down the line and tune in to a 1/32 ounce lure hitting the bottom in the mud bottom at Severn Run, then I promise you, you're going to feel a 2 ounce jig head when it hits a rock at the Bay Bridge. I mean, you have to. It will make you a better fisherman. It's just a natural progression. It's how we all learn how to fish, but somehow we forgot along the line that, hey, it's really fun to go back and fish for those little fish, and it will make me a better rock fisherman. And I promise you it will. I broke my personal best 3 times this winter for rock fish. The last fish I caught was with Joe Evans. We were night fishing. This was only 3 weeks ago, right before the season closed. And the fish was so big, the two of us couldn't bring it in the boat. And I've caught some big rockfish. I've caught 52-inch rockfish before. 2 of us couldn't bring the fish in the boat. I've got a 27-foot judge center console. I felt like we were going to turn the boat over. It was, I mean, I hate to say it's a 100-pound fish, but it was a huge fish. And we, you know, maybe it was a state record. We could keep it anyway. It's catch and release season only. But it was really nice fishing. Same exact techniques that I'm using for perch, we're using for rockfish. We're tuning in, we're thinking down the lines. It's all the mechanics are just the same. It just kind of perch fishing teaches you how to do that. Let's move ahead. Very quickly through rockfish. Solid plastic baits are my favorite. This is just a picture of my box. I make my own jig heads, and it's really easy to make when you pour lead. Probably explains my attention deficit disorder. Because I've been making lures ever since I've been installed. In fact, when I was a kid, I can remember walking around fishing for bluegill and chewing on lead singers. Explains a lot, okay? But they're easy to paint. Look at all the color contrast. I really like color contrast when it comes to fishing lures, because color contrast, I think, stimulate reaction strikes. When you think about it, have you ever watched National Geographic Channel or something, and you see a big school of bait with maybe a swordfish or something darting through that bait and eating that bait? And when they do that, all the fish move at one time. And there's a flash. Maybe it's a flash of light as the sun flashes off the scales of the fish, or maybe it's the gill flash, where you see red mixed in with the silver. Whatever it is, I think it drives fish crazy. I think they like to see that color contrast, and that color contrast stimulates them to bite when they normally wouldn't. That's the way the bass pros all win their contests, is to stimulate those reaction strikes. They try to get those fish to bite when they're not naturally inclined to bite. And that's the same way we become good fishermen for stripers or for any other fish, as far as that matter goes. There's just some examples of my buddy Jamie Cloud, who some of you have fished with. He's a guy at Eastern Shore Light Tackle Charters. Rich Jenkins, who lives right up the road here. He's coaching baseball tonight. He's one of my regular fishing partners and great fisherman. And that's right off Holly's Point. Right there, just right out the mouth of the river. And that was last year. Let's go ahead. Top water. So if you got a dock on the Severn, or you fish on the Severn very much, you want to fish top water. I had a buddy who was a cadet at the Naval Academy a few years back, and he took top water plugs, this kind right here, that's a spook, off the rocks at the Naval Academy wall, and was catching some of the biggest rockfish you've ever seen. And nobody could believe it, because how many times have you driven right past those rocks in a boat up and down the river and never thought about casting a lure there? He was going out there every evening and catching 30, 35-inch rockfish. You remember Brian? Now he's down somewhere in South Miami or somewhere and gets some big fish. Top water lures are divided up into two categories. One is a spook and the other is a popper. A popper splashes water. A spook walks the dog. So it does this, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And when it's a nice calm day, it'll leave a wake and it spreads out behind that plug. It looks like a snake or an eel or something swimming on the water. Stripers can't resist it. It's a fantastic way to fish. There's a little bit of a learning curve, but you need to learn how to walk the dog, to move that, kind of yo-yo that plug so it goes back and forth. But it's effective. And usually my first top water plug out of my box is this. This is a Lonely Angler, is the name of it. I think it's the best top water spook and that you can find on the Chesapeake. They're made up in Boston, but Ben lives in Cape Sinclair. It was the fellow who invented them, son, and he's their marketing manager. So kind of a local lure. Anyway, it's a good one. And that's a Stillwater snack, which is also an East Coast lure. I use the biggest ones I can find. And I also like the deepest rattle I can find. So I'm the crazy guy in the tackle shop who's picking up lures and shaking and listening, because I want it to be deep. Because when you think about it, the deeper the sound, the more sound travels through the water and through the air too. Like if you're in a boat and you go past a dock bar, when you first get at the dock bar, you can hear everything the band is playing, right? You can hear the lead guitar and the vocals and stuff. But as you move on out away from that dock and maybe you stop and start fishing, you can still hear the band, but what do you hear? Just the bass, right? Same way with fishing lures. That bass sound travels farther through water. So if I'm trying to call fish in, I want to use that deeper sounding lure. I want that deeper rattle. Now, if I'm fishing in breakers, I can use BB rattles or something. And then the fish are going to be close to it, and they're going to hear it. But if I'm trying to call fish in, I'm going to use a deeper rattle. Let's move on. Access is everything. So banks fishing spots are limited, as you know, on the Severn. If you're lucky enough to have a dock, well, then you don't have to worry about it so much. But there's not a whole lot of places, and I borrowed this from Lenny, Rudo, and Fish Talk. But it just showed some of the places. Jonas Green Park, we were just talking about that a little earlier, Ginger. Truxton Park at Spa Creek. And you know, that's kind of a distance, but I think it's the only public ramp on the Severn, isn't it? Or no, maybe not. Wings Creek, and is that ramp public? You know, Jeff?
Yeah,
Is it?
it's small, but under.
Yeah, it's small, yeah. So there's not a lot, and you know, I want to make a point here that the Severn River is a natural resource, which means it's a public resource, which means it belongs to everybody. It doesn't just belong to those of us who are lucky enough to be able to afford to live on the water. And I was lucky enough to live on Magothy here. I don't live too far from the water now, but it belongs to everybody. So we need more access because, you know, at the point I made earlier on, I think access drives the desire for conservation. The more people we get out there doing it, the more people will want to take care of it. So Smith's Marina has a pay ramp. You can put a boat in there. I think it costs $10. And then Beeman's Point, which is way down park there. And so when we catch croaker or spot, that's a good place to go down there and fish off the rocks. That's on the backside of the Naval Academy, close to the golf course. Let's move ahead. Finding the fish. How do I know where to fish? I'm going out on the Severn. I'm in a boat or kayak or something. I want to try to find a fish. What's the best tip that I know of to help you find fish? That is this. Look for underwater points or above water structure that dissects the normal flow of current at a 90-degree angle. Think about that for a minute. An underwater ledge, a dock that juts out into the water, the Naval Academy Bridge, the Route 50 bridge. Maybe you can think about some other bridges. Maybe it's just a point that comes out. And so the tide in the Severn is east-west, I guess. And so outgoing tide, the water's flowing east, incoming is flowing west usually. So what I like to do is to cast so that my lure is moving with the current. Now, a rockfish, any fish that I know of, maybe some of the cichlids can swim backwards, but a rockfish can't swim backwards. So they have to face into the current all the time. So if I'm casting to a rockfish, do I want the lure sticking him up and hitting him in the tail? Or do I want it coming down, hit him in the nose where he's looking like he wants to eat? I want it coming down toward his nose. So I'm going to cast into the current so that my lure is moving with the current. That'll help you catch more fish. You can catch fish the other way, but you'll catch more if you cast into the current. And that goes with bridge pilings or points or topwater or jigging, however you want to do it. And finally, I mentioned live hard bottoms. Let's go to the next slide. Oyster bars. So this is a couple of slides I borrowed from the internet pictures, and this is some historic oyster bars mapped from 1906 to 1911. Look at Round Bay. Look at the oyster bars up in Round Bay. There's not an oyster in Round Bay now that I know of. But maybe under some docks that somebody's planning. I don't know how long they'll live there. But all the way up, almost to the mouth of Severn River. All down through here. Let's go back to that slide just for a minute. I want to point out this particular picture here. So did you see the oyster there? You see, look what's growing on it. That's not little oysters, that's mussels. The mussels are growing there, and I mentioned earlier how there's little crabs and little worms and stuff down there. So this is on a low tide, but when it's on a high tide, you know, that's all covered up. Now, if I drop a jig down there, I'm probably going to hang up. So you got to be really careful. But the good thing about oyster bars is when you do hang up, all you got to do is pull it real hard, and it'll pull the oyster right up. Oysters plume up over time. So they don't just grow flat on the bottom. Now, we think of them as growing flat on the bottom because we're harvesting them so frequently in the Chesapeake Bay that they don't have a chance to plume up. But if you go down further south, or there's some places in the bay where you'll see them plume up. which means that they just, kind of stack on top of each other and can be 6 feet high sometimes. And these plumes, there's one place down Sharps Island that does that now. It's one of the best fishing spots in the bay, and I write about it in one of my books. We're doing a lot of work for oyster restoration, and that slide shows some of the places. All those places are good places to fish for white perch in the summertime. They're excellent places to fish for white perch. Let's go ahead. Speaking of 90-degree angles, look at this picture right here. Tell me what's missing. This was done in 1940. The bridge, what bridge is missing? Route 50 bridge. What's there though? Yeah, the railroad bridge. So who here has fished the railroad bridge? Yeah, it's known as a great spot. And look, I like this picture down here. You can't see it very good here, but there's people sitting on the bridge fishing back in the 1940s, and there's somebody even in a boat there fishing. It was a good place to fish when it was a bridge, and it's still a good place to fish because a lot of those pilings are still down there. And still great fishing. John H. Williams took me there the first time I fished with him, and we thought white perch still got tired of catching them. And it's just a great place to fish. If you go out this summer and you're looking for white perch, you want to bring some home for a fish fry or something, get the railroad bridge, especially on both sides of the banks, where it comes into the bank. And it's not hard to find it. Between the Route 50 bridge and Naval Bridge. I'm wrapping up, but I wanted to talk about conservation just a little bit. Like I said, this is why we do it. I love to fish, but I want to take care of the water. That's the reason that I'm a board member for the Alliance. It's the reason I'm a board member both for CCA National and CCA American. I want to preserve this. I love it when my grandkids come up and fish, and I want their children to be able to fish the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay could be Disneyland for fishing if we managed it right. There's so many species here, such good fishing here, but we manage it like a cornfield instead of a tributary. We try to harvest just as much as we can possibly harvest without killing everything. And we end up over harvesting everything. If we managed it right, just think of how the tourism, think of all the people that would come in, think of what it would do for our economy. Because the fishing could be so good. Now, that may be a self-defeating prophecy because the more people that fish, there's already a lot of people fishing in this area right now. More people that fish, the more fish are going to catch. A lot of stuff that, it's going to be taken out of the bay. But like I said, I think the conservation ethic outweighs the impact on the resource. I don't know that, but I believe that. I told you my dad was church Christ minister. And he had a sermon he would talk about in the book of Mark. There's a verse that says, to whom much is given, much is expected. We're very fortunate here to live on the Severn River and be able to fish and enjoy the crabs and the boating and the hiking and everything that we love about the Chesapeake Bay. But as a result, we don't have a responsibility to give back to that. You're doing it. You wouldn't be here tonight. You wouldn't be a part of the Severn River Association if you weren't already doing that. Project Clean Stream is something that the Chesapeake Bay, the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay sponsors, and we help groups all over the area. If you want to do a stream cleanup, talk to us. Talk to me, talk to Kate, talk to Mason, talk to any of the Alliance people who are here. We'll put you in touch with the right people. You can do a stream cleanup anywhere. It can be the back of a grocery store parking lot. It could be along a stream. It could be a high school parking lot, anywhere like that. Anything that drains into the Chesapeake, anything in the watershed, let's clean it up. You want to get the trash out of it, the Alliance can help, and we'll be happy to do that. And so, if you're not involved, and I know a lot of you are, some of you that I'm looking out here, and I know have been on stream cleanups with me over on the Eastern Shore and some on the Western Shore, so thank you for that. Takeaways, and then I'm wrapping up. Access and love the outdoors inspires conservation and environmentalism. Fish are a public resource and they belong to everybody. It doesn't just belong to one or two of us. They're fun to catch for all ages and by varying techniques. No right and wrong way to fish. I've told you my best ways to do it, and you probably have your best ways to do it. I hope you can take away a little something from this talk. Most fish in this area are not threatened, and they're delicious. So, let's eat them. get involved. It's up to us. And thanks again for your work. One more slide and I'm done. I just wanted to tell you, I do have a few books here. If anybody's interested, I've got them in the back there and I'm happy to sign them. They're just $20 each. It's over 25 plus shipping online, so you can save $10 if you want to get them here tonight. Just a few questions. Do we have time for any, Jesse, or are we out?
Yeah, but let me just do a little housekeeping on that one.
Sure.
So everybody, we do have a mic that we can pass around. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll come around and give you the mic. That way, the people that are watching on Zoom can actually hear what the question is. So yeah, with that, I'll grab that lapel mic and hand this back to you. Okay.
That's it. I don't know how to ask a question.
All right.
Anybody have anything? There's one in the back.
Thank you. I live up the Severn River on the creek, and about 2 weeks ago, about 10 o'clock at night, a boat came in to go fishing, which happens a lot. But this boat had an array of spotlights on the front. I guess like equivalent of 8 car headlights shining, and he was going around the bank. He was fishing on the bank. What was that all about? Any idea?
Yep, and they're snakehead fishing. They're both fishing for snakeheads. So the fact that they're in your creek tells me that they probably think there are snakeheads in your creek, and there probably are. You know, the snakehead population just keeps increasing. I'm kind of this is just me personally. I don't like boat fishing. I think it's cheating. But on the other hand, they're invasive. It's an invasive species, so we need to eradicate them. So that's what they're doing. And so they light it up so they can see down in the water really well. And there's a guy standing up on the front with a boat, usually 2 or 3 people. And they have really wide bows on those boats and usually railing, keep them from falling out. And they're looking for those fish. And then they have reels on the boat. So they shoot it, the arrows attached to fishing line. And so the fish will take off, they put it on the boat. So that's what was going on here. It's interesting to know that they're boat fishing in the Severn now. I didn't know that. Yes, sir.
I wasn't going to ask a question. I told myself I wasn't going to ask a question, but I live on a secret little creek off the Severn. Jesse knows it well. And over the years, we've had all this seaweed that has come into the creeks and along the banks, and the traditional perch fishing grounds are harder to fish because your little pumpkin seed or your little green something you mentioned earlier, the angler sells that great little lure that perch backpackers get all fouled up. So what do you recommend? I fish the banks, I cast the fish, but the seaweed seems to foul it up. So you're forced to fish deeper water. Is there something you recommend?
Yeah, and so first point I want to make there is it's really a good thing. Subaquatic vegetation is fish habitat. That's where fish like to live, and crabs, and so that's not a bad thing. And you know, there are people who dredge out in front of their docks, and they used to, I don't know if they still allow that or not, but they'll try to get rid of that stuff. And I don't think that's a good idea. You want that habitat. And we even rate when they do the Chesapeake Bay report card, subaquatic vegetation is one of the things that rate the bay on. It's been better, been worse in the last couple of years. Hopefully, it'll get better. How to fish it is a little tougher. My favorite way to fish it is to rig those lures weedless. So think about that perch pounder. So it's got the spinner, and it's got a little, it's got the hook coming out. I talked about how the hook rides up, which helps a little, but you can rig that so that the hook is inside that plastic. So stick it all the way through and then back it out so that it's not all the way through the lure. So that'll keep that from hanging up. Now those perch pounders are going to still hit grass on them anyway because they're wide profile and they've got that safety pin. So maybe just a single headed lure rigged weedless, which just means bury the barb of your hook, bury the point of your hook inside the soft plastic. Also, try that if you've got that situation going on. try it with a longer lure and rig like a 4 or 5/0 hook, at least a 2/0 hook through a soft plastic, through a 6-inch soft plastic, and jig it along the top. So this is a bass fishing technique. So what happens is you take it across the top of that grass and then let it fall down every once in a while. And then twitch it a little bit and let it come back up. It's a killer rockfish technique, and it'll work. So that's the best advice. It is a problem. I understand, but that's the best advice I can give you for doing this.
Sean, thanks so much for, your books are awesome, and thank you for talking was awesome too. I have a question about your fly rod, size and weight, and then also, what was the indicators that you used for?
Yeah, the indicator is called Oros, O-R-O-S, not Orvis, Oros. They just came out about 3 years ago, and then they really have revolutionized the fly fishing indicator business. They're the best thing out there that I know of right now, because the line goes right through the center of it. You know how the other indicators, you have to tie them on the outside somehow. And it causes them not to fly straight, for one thing, when you cast it, and then they act weird in the water when especially if you're having to jerk it along. So these are my favorite ones, at least now. This is a Redington 3-weight with the inexpensive rod. I mean, you can buy them at most of the tackle shops for $150 or so. And you know, fly fishing can be an expensive hobby. I've got a sage rod that's worth over $1,000. That it sits at home on the shelf. I'm afraid to take it out and break it. But it's not a real expensive, and I prefer machined fly reels. And this is a G Limits Venture 5. That's a 20-year-old reel. That actually it's a Venture 3, but they're machined reels. And machined is usually a little bit better quality than cast when it comes to fly fishing stuff. So that's my perch outfit, and also use it for bluegill and shell crackers and stuff. 3-weight with a 3-weight reel, and that might be 4-weight floating line. I like to overload those rods a little bit just because it makes it easier to cast when you've got a lot of stuff going on with like a floating fly on there. I wouldn't put 2 sides of the line up, but at least one side's line up on those lighter rods. Now, if you're using a 2-weight or they even make 1-weight, I don't think I'd go up on those, because you can snap a rod, by casting it with line that's too heavy. But usually you can get away with going up 1 line size on a floating line. But great question.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat, so I'll do those. So can you comment on the proper technique with catch and release without harming the fish? How do you get the hook out of its mouth?
Yeah, and so I've had the good fortune to fish with some anglers who were involved with some of the seminal catch and release studies. And by the way, Joe Gill was involved in some of those studies too, up on the Susquehanna Flats, where they did some testing with rockfish, and what they found out was the #1 factor that influences whether a fish lives or dies after it's caught is how deeply it's hooked. So if it's caught in the mouth, usually they survive. In fact, most of them, vast majority of the time, the colder the water, the more they're likely they are to survive. But if they're caught deep, well, then they usually don't survive, because it gets down in, where there's vital internal organs and stuff. So bait fishing usually kills more fish. So if you're bait fishing, if you like to chunk a live line or something, there's nothing wrong with that. Go out and do it, but stop after you get your limit. No reason to keep fishing. Get your limit and quit. But for light tackle, barbless hooks, you can bend the barbs on those hooks as long as you keep your line tight. That will keep it from damaging the fish so much. I don't always bend my hooks. Bend my barbs. But sometimes I do. If I'm topwater fishing, almost always. Which brings up another point. Treble hooks are not good for fish because, those plugs that I'm talking about, they got 2 sets of treble hooks, sometimes 3. One close to the front, one on the back. Rockfish almost always hit a lure head first. And so they'll get caught on that first lure, those first set of hooks. But where's those other hooks? Well, they're rattling around, probably going in the fish's eye or going in their gills or something like that. Or when you reach down to grab it, they're going in your hand. So good for the fish, good for the fishermen, get rid of those treble hooks. And don't fish when it's really hot. And Maryland DNR is doing a good job of, they've got this red light, yellow light, green light thing going on now where they will tell you if it's dangerous to catch and release fish, they'll put a red light up. And they even close the season in the hotter months. So it's a good idea when wet water is really warm. Warm, fresh water will kill a rockfish. I learned that really early down in Tennessee because we're fishing freshwater TVA lakes. And those fish would not live at all. If you caught them, you couldn't release a rockfish down there because that warm, fresh water, they would almost always die. But here with the water saltier, cold water, 95, 98% of the fish live, even more. But in the summertime, best just not to fish for rockfish, fish for other species when the water is hot because you're going to kill everything you catch.
All right, we'll do the one other out of the chat. Somebody lives up close to Severn River and last week saw a huge flock of cormorants go into town and they want to know what was running up there.
Yeah, so cormorants are, I've got a chapter in Chesapeake Lake Tackle about birds and probably one in the Wright Stuff book too. And there are birds who need fish to help them catch bait. For example, seagulls, they look for rockfish or breaking on surface and forcing bait up so it gets close to the surface so they can dive down and get them. But there are also birds, for example, terns or cormorants, who are able to catch their own fish. And loons, for example, can also catch their own bait. And the way they do it is they dive down. So it was probably bait that was bringing those cormorants in there of some kind. It could have been white perch or even yellow perch. I don't know, but what I suspect, there's a lot of bait. For whatever reason, we've got a lot of menhaden in the bay this year. And they're moving up into the creeks too. And so I would suspect that it was more than likely menhaden, or it could have been some other species. Now, yellow perch have spawned early enough now that bait's getting on up, about an inch long or so. So they could be chasing that too. Cormorants, what do we do about cormorants? I don't know. I heard him talk to a guy one time. He said, we just need to hire a whole bunch of cats to live on the islands and take care of the cormorants. So I don't know. So cormorants, are they invasive? I guess they are, but they live everywhere. And if you drive across the Bay Bridge, I live on Kent Island, drive across the Bay Bridge pretty much every day, you will see thousands of cormorants that roost at night on the Bay Bridge. And I see more and more out on the bay all the time. They eat fish. How much of an impact they're having, I don't know. I'll leave that up to the scientists to figure it out, but I do think it's an issue.
All right, any other questions?
Your invasive species slide, you didn't mention carp, and I know in the upper Severn, there's a lot of carp. And then one other comment, on other more or less exotic fish in the Severn, a few years ago, somebody told me kind of just past Round Bay upriver, they were catching Spanish mackerel. I was amazed. So anyway,
Yeah, I could see Spanish mackerel moving up if the water's salty. So, if you get a good salty summer, which we did a few years ago, Spanish mackerel will come up. Same with bluefish. Bluefish, a lot of times you'll see birds working just above the Route 50 bridge. That's almost always little blues in the summertime. They don't get too big, but yeah, in Spanish mackerel are species that are really coming on. And I think it has a little bit to do with climate change. The water's getting warmer and there's more and more fish coming up from the south. And I think that's right. Carp, different subjects. So I guess you can make the point that every fish is an invasive species at one time or another. Carp have been here long enough that I consider them native. And so those guys who are out there bow fishing, sometimes they'll shoot carp and sometimes they'll shoot, other native species. I wish they would. Because I don't believe in the term trash fish. I don't think there's any such thing as trash fish. There are invasive species we want to eradicate, but most of those species, carp, for example, are beneficial. Carp start to spawn when water temperature gets on up about 70 degrees, and they move up in the shallows and they start moving that aquatic vegetation around, and it helps other animals spawn. There's also certain kinds of worms that are processed through carp's body, and that's their life cycle. So you will see a lot more carp in the Severn, as the weather warms up and you start seeing them jumping and spawning. They spawn by, the female gets up in the shallow water and a bunch of males will get around her. They bump up against her kind of like rockfish. So she drops her eggs and then they fertilize the eggs. And when I was a kid, we used to take a wash tub and go out. And you get an old rusty wash tub's been sitting out in the yard for a while. I'm, short my hillbilly roots. But you take that rusted out wash tub and put them down over the cart and catch them. There was a guy came around with a dime for a nickel. And so we got some soda. A great question.
All right, let's do one more, I think, and then we should probably wrap it up. Yeah.
How are you doing? Hey, that was a great speech and enjoyed your everything you saw so far. I was just wondering, what are we going to be doing about the declining rockfish populations in the Severn? Because I live on the Severn, I grew up in the Severn since I was a kid, so I've been there 40 years. The rockfish population in the Severn is not what it was 5 to 10 years ago, and it's severely declined, in my opinion, in the last 5 to 10 years. And we're not catching the rockfish size or quantity that we were in previous years. And as you said, we also have the second phase of my question is, we have a severe problem with ground bay being a red tide area being a dead zone. Why are we not addressing the runoff and the fertilization and over fertilization and septic issues that are plaguing around bay and all the way up and down the Severn River? There needs to be like control of this whole situation because it's like it's plugging all the creeks and all the fishing spots that you're talking about. We're not going to have fishing after that point.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. And both of those subjects are things we could talk about for, hours on end. And you talk to 10 different rock fishermen, they're going to give you 10 different opinions on how to manage rockfish. I'll tell you what the fishing managers will say, and I'll tell you what I think. So when it comes to rockfish, if it 10, 15 years ago, yeah, it was a lot better. When I first moved here 17 years ago, it was lights out, good. Now, we were just coming off the moratorium and we had given the rockfish a few years to recover and things were kind of increasing and we're still pretty high. That's what the fisherman managers will tell you, I think. And since then, we've been catching more and more fish and we're still catching more and more breeding stock. And so I think that's why the numbers are declining. They definitely are declining. And the science shows us that they're declining too. And so, I've got some good friends who are working for Maryland DNR now and also who are serving on the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which is the organization that manages rockfish. And they're doing everything that they can, but it's every state on the East Coast and every state has its own priorities. And a lot of it is that cornfield analogy. They just want to take as many fish as they can possibly take out. This is me talking now. And it's not about preserving the fish so they can make more fish. It's about how many fish can you harvest, because they feel like harvesting fish is the most important thing. We got to get away from that mentality, I think. And we've got to get to the mentality that these rockfish are a public resource and they belong to all of us. And they don't just belong to commercial guys or the people who want to keep fish. They belong to all of us. And the more fish we have swimming, the more access we have, the more of us want to fish and the more people are wanting to take care of them. That's what I think. And back to your other question about water quality and red tides. Yeah, it's terrible. When I lived on the Magazine, 3 of my neighbors' houses were built after you couldn't put a septic tank in there, and they just had storage tanks. It's that way on the Severn. A lot of the older places just have sewage storage tanks. What happens when it rains? They overflow. They overflow and they go right in the bay. And I've seen people just pump sewage right into the bay out of those storage tanks before. I've been fishing a bay, pickerel fishing, even in the wintertime. And I see a hose pipe connected to a pump going up to a sewage storage. We got to do something about that. And that's just, I think it's our state legislature that needs to get involved and take care of the city issues because it's a big problem. I agree with you 100%. Wish I knew. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Shawn, so much for coming out. We're gonna wrap it up on Zoom, so thank you all for tuning in, and Sean, we'll stick around here for a little while, I think, until the management tells us we gotta clear out, but if anybody wants to, buy a book back in the back, he's heading back there, you can work that out. And thank you all for coming out tonight and for supporting the Severn River Association. If you want to learn more about what we're doing to combat the sort of pollution that you're talking about, we've got brochures and business cards, and always happy to talk about the work that we're up to. So thank you all for coming out.